Today we will talk about the methods paper. That's kind of continuum of the previous paper, which was introduction literature review, and you put the question to the end. Now, what I want you to do is add the question to the top of this paper. So put your research question to the top, and then go ahead and address the 4 important sections, which is population and sample. In this section, you are going to talk about the sampling strategy, the target sample size, how you are going to retrieve that sample size, who will be in your study, etc. So you will provide all these details, and then you are going to talk how you are going to find that sample, where you are going to find that sample. And then you will talk about the study design. In that section, you will identify the type of the design. Is it quasi-experimental? Is it true experimental, pre-experimental? What type of design is that? And then you are going to provide your rationale for it, why you choose that specific type of design. And also, you are going to provide a design handout and diagram like O's and X's, how you are defining that that design. So in terms of sampling and design, today we will cover those. I will give a brief lecture on these, so you will have a better idea about what to put there and why. And next week, we will talk about the measures in more detail, and also we will talk about the procedures in more detail. So in these 2 sections, in the measures section, you are going to find if there is a pre-existing measure, you are going to talk about that measure, right? Let's say your outcome is depression. You can use back depression inventory. So if you are using back depression inventory, you will have access to bunch of others information, such as reliability of the measure, validity of the measure, scoring of the measure, items, item examples. So you will have all this information. You can find all this information in the articles that use that specific pre-existing measure before. Again, if it's something that is pre-existing, I strongly recommend you to go and use something that is being used before. So if you are measuring anxiety, try to find something that's already existing, that's already proven valid and reliable, and use that. If it's not pre-existing, then you need to come up with that measure. You need to create the measure and explain the processes. Provide some items, how you are measuring it, provide information about scoring. And then the final section will be procedures. In the procedures section, you will literally talk about the procedures, like how did you collect the data? Was there an IRB process? Where did you get the IRB? You guys probably know IRB from the research course, right? Institutional Review Board. Before starting to any type of research, you need to get IRB approval if it involves human subjects. Okay. Before getting IRB approval, we can't do any research. So you will talk about that, like where did you get the IRB approval? You can say we are planning to get it from University of Central Florida. Again, this is a proposal, guys. You are going to propose the research. You are not actually going and doing this research. You're just proposing it. Okay. So now, I know this assignment sounds overwhelming because it has multiple components like sampling, design, measures, procedures, which I understand sounds overwhelming, but we will go over these step by step and you will feel better about this, okay? So to make you feel even better, I am giving you an option. By the end of this week, you can submit your draft by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. So create a draft by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Submit it. I will provide you with the feedback by Thursday. And based on that feedback that you received from me, you can make the changes and modifications and then do the final submission next week by Sunday 11:59. Not this week, but next week will be the final. And I'm going to grade that paper. But I'm saying final for measures section, not the final paper. Okay. So you can submit the draft by this Sunday and the actual paper next Sunday to be graded. Okay. Draft will not be graded. It's just for me to provide you the feedback. Now, I said I will talk about the sampling and research design at the beginning of the session. So now we will do that. I have some PowerPoint slides. I would like to briefly talk about this so you will have an idea about what type of sampling strategy you can use or what type of research design you can choose. Now let's start with the sampling. So for sampling, we have two main types of sampling. Go back and okay. We have probability and non-probability type of sampling strategies. Probability is when every single member of the population has an equal chance of being selected to the sample. Then you are using one of the probability sampling strategies. However, in non-probability, every single member of the population doesn't have an equal chance to being selected to your sample. Again, as you guys remember from the research courses, sampling is all about taking a sample from the whole body of the population. So if I am taking a sample from the UCF, that means I can have like 300 students out of 68,000 students. And with that 300 students, I can do my study. Okay. There are multiple ways of taking that sample. Again, there are probability type of sampling strategies, which comes up with the assumption that every single member of the population has an equal chance for being selected. And I also have non-probability types where every single member of the population doesn't have an equal chance. Now, when we talk about specific types, you will have a better understanding about what do I mean by that. So in terms of probability, we have these four sampling strategies: simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified, and cluster random sampling strategies. Simple random sampling is literally like drawing a random name from the hat and put it to your sample. Okay, so it's randomly every single member of the population's name is in the hat, and you are just taking from the hat randomly and putting it to your sample. And then finally, you have enough sample, you are closing it, and that's the people that you are going to do your study with. There are more systematic ways of doing this. Sometimes when you are dealing with, especially when you are dealing with big number of people, you can do this systematically. What do we mean by doing this systematically? So imagine that you have 100 in the population, and out of that 100, you want to choose 20. Okay, so out of that 100 people, your sample will be 20 of them. That means one member in every 5 members in the population will be in your sample. So 1 out of 5 will be in your population. So when you are choosing the first out of 5, you are choosing it randomly. That could be 1, that could be 3, that could be 4. You are choosing the first one randomly. And then every 5th member after the first number, every 5th member ends up in your sample. So in this case, I choose randomly 4, right? Like, let's say I choose 1 to 5 and the 4 came as a number. And then after 4, every 5th member will be in my sample, which means after 4, the 5th member will be 9th, and after 9th, the 5th member will be 14th and 19th, and it will go on. Okay, that way, systematically, I'm choosing my sample. The other type is stratified. Stratified is a bit more complicated because you have stratas here. What do we mean by stratas? Stratas could be anything. It could be race categories, it could be gender categories, other different categories. So When we are doing stratified, again, we are choosing the population to the sample, but this time you have boxes. You have boxes in the population, and from those boxes, you are pulling to the boxes in the sample. So imagine that we are doing this study with UCF students, and race is the stratum. So I will have stratas as white, African American, Hispanic. I have the same categories in the population, right? So imagine that I am pulling from those boxes in the population. My population was UCF students. So I am pulling from the white UCF students box, like which includes all white UCF students names. Okay. I'm pulling from that. I'm putting to my white box in my sample. And then African American, I'm putting to African American box. Assuming that I need 300 from each of the races, when I have 100 white randomly chosen, I'm closing the white box, and then I'm choosing randomly 100 from African American, and then I'm choosing 100 from Hispanic UCF students to my sample. The important part here is I am doing this randomly. When I'm choosing from white box, white UCF students box, every single white UCF student has an equal chance for being selected to my sample. When I'm choosing from African American box, again, every single African American UCF student has an equal chance of being selected. That's important because that makes it probability type of sampling. Okay, so why this is important? Sometimes you need a valid representation of a population, right? What do you mean by valid representation? Imagine that you are conducting a study and being Asian is important for your study. You want a perspective of Asian students, okay? You want them to be represented in your sample. If you do it randomly, the chances are you may not get any Asian UCF student, or you may get a few, right? I mean, to make sure that you have enough representation, you can use that stratified strategy. So you will have a box for Asian students, you will have a box for other or white or whatever categories you have predetermined, and you are choosing from Asian UCF student population to your sample first, and then white UCF student population to your sample as different categories. Does that make sense? That way you will have a representation of Asian population in your sample. So that was stratified. Finally, cluster random sampling is the last type of probability sampling that we will talk today. In the cluster, we usually use this when we are dealing with nested data, especially with geographic location. So what do you mean by nested data? So when you are looking to this, like examples, you see that students are in the colleges, like nested in the colleges. Colleges are nested in the cities. Cities nested in the states, right? So step by step, you are choosing randomly in this case. Like first, you are choosing the state out of the country. So out of the whole United States, you are choosing 3 states. And then out of each of these states, you are choosing, let's say, 2 cities. And out of each city, you are choosing 2 colleges. That way you will have a sample, representative sample chosen. What's the logic of this? Why we are doing this? Why we are not just randomly choosing from all high school students or all college students across the United States? The reason is simple, because it will be almost impossible if you are doing this with large populations. Imagine that you have 1,000 people in your sample and you are choosing randomly from the all high school students in the United States. One will be in Wisconsin, the other will be in Kansas, the other will be in California. It will be all over the United States. One will be in Hawaii. So you need to travel different places, different counties, different cities. It will take years to collect that data if you don't have a lot of resources, right? But in this way, it's easier. You will just have 3 states located, you can go and collect them easier. You will have you have to deal with a few counties compared to bunch of widespread people, right? So this will be easier. So when you are dealing with that type of nested data, that strategy can become really handy. So you can first choose state, then choose county, then choose school, then students, step by step. But each of these processes should be randomly, right? So you are choosing randomly out of 51 states, you are choosing 3. And then from each of these states, you are choosing randomly counties or cities, whatever you decided to, okay? All right, that was the last probability sampling strategy type. And now we have non-probability sampling strategies. What do you mean by non-probability? In the non-probability sampling strategies, every single member of the population doesn't have an equal chance of being selected. What do you mean by that? If I'm collecting data, let's say I would like to collect data from UCF students again, but to collect data, I went to the library, and whoever I saw there as a student, I gave them that questionnaire and collected the data from them. Do you think every single UCF student will have an equal chance of being selected to my study? No. Students who are using the library most will have a higher chance of ending up in my study. So that's convenience. That's why I did that, because it was convenient to me going to the library, collecting that data. And that's called convenience sampling strategy. That's non-probability sampling strategy, because again, every single member of the population doesn't have an equal chance of being selected. So convenience is one type. We also have purposive. Imagine that I'm looking for certain people, like I'm looking doctors who are working with refugees. I'm specifically looking for them and just collect data from them. I purposefully sample. I purposefully choose my sample. In this case, again, every single member doesn't have an equal chance of being selected. I purposefully choose. I choose on purpose. So that's called purposive sampling. That's being used especially when you are looking for an expert of an area or something in that sort. Purposive, also we have snowball. Sometimes snowball considered under purposive strategy. Sometimes it's considered as a separate strategy. I will accept both, whichever you feel easier. So in the snowball, when you are dealing with hard to find population, let's say you are collecting data from LGBTQ members who has a pancreatic cancer, it's not easy to find, right? Like you cannot go to the street and find a member like that on the street. It must be specifically targeted, like you need to receive a referral or something, right? Assuming that you find 1 or 2, and from those people, you can get more referrals. And that way you can increase your sample size, and eventually you will have enough sample to infer meaningful results. So it grows like snowball. So you have 2 participants, they are referring you another 2, and those people are referring you more. So it grows like snowball. That's why they call it snowball sampling strategy. The last type is quota sampling. Quota is very similar to stratified, with only one difference, which is in quota, you're not using random sampling strategy. You are not choosing randomly from the box. So I'm not randomly choosing from, if race is my strata, I'm not randomly choose from white box to my sample white box. What I'm doing is, like, I'm going to the library and ask people, are you white? Yes. Okay, I'm going to ask you these questions. Again, I have that category, I have that box, but I'm not choosing randomly. They either volunteer or I find them somewhere. It's not random. Okay, that's the difference between stratified and quota. In stratified, you have random selection, random sampling strategy. In here, you don't have that. Okay. All right, now that was for sampling. Now let's talk a little bit about research design, and then we can conclude tonight. So for research design, I will talk about a few group designs. Again, let's look at the chart, what we have done so far. So we passed independent variable, dependent variable distinction, right? In terms of the modules that was in the previous module. So IV dV difference, IV is the independent variable, dV is the dependent variable. Independent variable is the variable that makes the impact. Dependent variable is the variable that is impacted or that's changed. Like if I have a program and I'm aiming to reduce anxiety with that program, the program or the intervention is my independent variable. With that intervention or program, anxiety aimed to change, right? Anxiety is the dependent variable. It changes depending on my intervention, which could be CBT or the program that I implemented. That's IVDV, that's independent variable, dependent variable difference. And we talked about sampling literally 1 minute ago. And now we will talk about design. So in the design, we have different design types. We have pre-experimental, we have quasi-experimental, and we have experimental. The two that are mostly mixed are quasi-experimental and true experimental. So let's first start talking about what these diagrams mean. What is E, what is C, what's O, what does that mean? So when I see something like that, what I should understand, right? So E here is the experimental group. Experimental group is the group that gets the intervention. Guys, I'm sorry, my screen went dark. Just give me a second. I will be back. I'm trying to open it again. I can't see now. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry for that. That was a technical issue. It suddenly went dark. Now I'm back. I can see my screen. All right. So, oops, I laid it. So, experimental group and control group. Again, experimental group represented with E, and that's the group that gets the intervention. Okay. So whatever the intervention is, experimental group will get that the intervention. That's why we call it experimental group. And you will have control or comparison group. Control group either doesn't get any intervention or gets an alternative intervention. If it doesn't get any intervention, you don't need to put anything here. If it gets alternative intervention, you can put Y as an alternative intervention, okay? Don't put X because two X's means you have two interventions. And then both of them will become experimental group. Doesn't make any sense. And then you need to provide the same intervention to two groups. That doesn't make any sense. So put different letter like Y. So if you are using an alternative strategy, put Y here, X and Y. All right. So again, in the experimental design, we see the same symbols, right? E is the experimental group, C is the control group. And we learned about X, right? X is the intervention. What about O? What does O means here? O is the observation. So we are doing pre-test, post-test, right? Like imagine that I'm measuring depression and my intervention is CBT, okay? Cognitive behavioral therapy. So I measure their depression levels. That's the baseline. For both groups, I measured their depression levels at the beginning without giving any intervention. Then the experimental group gets the intervention. And after the intervention, I am measuring their depression levels again to see if my intervention made any impact on their depression levels. Okay? So those O's are observation. That's pre-test, that's post-test. Pre-observation, post-observation. Pre-test, post-test. Okay? Again, in the experimental design, we are seeing the same thing, right? Same symbols with only one difference. What is the difference here? It's this R. I'm sorry. So R means random assignment. That's not random sampling. That's different. In random sampling, I was choosing from the whole population to my sample, right? Now, I choose my sample, I'm done with sampling. Now, I'm in the design section. I have my sample. I'm in the design section. I'm assigning people in my sample into two groups. That's random assignment. That's not sampling. We already done with sampling when we close the sampling section, okay? Random assignment is in the design section. Again, I have my sample. I'm pulling from my sample and putting it to the either experimental group or control group. If I'm doing this randomly, that's random assignment. And that's the difference between true experimental and quasi-experimental. If I'm doing this randomly, then I have true experimental design. If I'm not doing this randomly, then I have quasi-experimental design. So why we don't use random assignment or randomization all the time? There are a few reasons for that. Sometimes it's not ethical. Sometimes you cannot just assign people into groups. Sometimes they need to volunteer to the group, or they need to choose which treatment they will get, right? Sometimes it's not just ethical to assign people into the groups. So you need to consider all these factors when you are deciding if I should go with quasi-experimental, if I should go with true experimental design, what design fits best to my research question, okay? All right, so in terms of design types, we also have a time dimension. What do we mean by time dimension? If you are using cross-sectional design, that means you are collecting the data at one point at one time. So I have questionnaires, I'm going out and asking questions to people, collect the data, come back, that's it. I don't have any other time points. Then that's cross-sectional. However, if I am observing change over time, that is longitudinal. What do we mean by change over time? Let's go back to the diagram we had. So you see this, right? This is right after the intervention. So right after the intervention, I measured their depression levels. Assuming that our intervention was effective, do I know if they retain that effect or how long they retain that effect? No. But if I have multiple observations, like this, so assuming that after 3 months, I measured that again to see if they retained the impact, and after 3 months, I measured it again. So I'm measuring over time to see the change over time. This is longitudinal. This is to observe the change over time. And this longitudinal designs will give you the best causality. Cross-sectional will not give you causality. Longitudinal will provide the best causality. Okay, don't forget about that. Any questions about research design types, sampling strategies? Was it clear enough? Great. If you don't have any questions, I will close the session. Again, make sure to put your rationale there, like why you choose this specific type of design, why you choose this specific type of sampling strategy. Again, there are a bunch of justifications, as I just explained. I mean, if you are using true experimental has less internal validity threats, first of all, and it's the best design. So that's why you are using it. That by only itself justifies why you are using true experimental. But what if you are using quasi-experimental, pre-experimental? Then you need to come up with your justification. What made you not to choose true experimental? Was it unethical? Was it other underlying reasons that you had? So you need to just explain that. Did you have only one group, maybe? And why you did have only one group? If you explain that, that will justify it. Okay. Any questions, concerns? Yes.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so for mine, I'm doing, we have a program at work where we only do measurements at the beginning of the program and then when somebody graduates from the program. So my evaluation is looking at participants at like 6 months and a year after graduation to see if those gains were kept over those time periods. So when I'm doing my sampling, I'm only looking at people who have gone through the program. So is that, and so I guess my question is that more like a, what was it called? Like the purposive, is that how you say that?
That's
Where
convenience. That sounds like convenience to
that's
me.
more convenience. Okay.
Yes, because I mean, if you are working with a specific agency and you just are taking the clients of that agency, you did that because that agency was in your convenience and you just wanted to work with them. You had networks in there, you had connections with that agency, whatever the reason was, but it was convenient to you. That's why you did that. In
Okay,
purposive, it's more widespread. You are going after it and choosing it like, oh, are you a doctor? Are you working with refugees? Okay, then can I collect some information from you? And then you are going to find another one.
okay.
What you described sounds more like a convenience sampling strategy.
Okay, so there's no way it would be randomized if I have, like, my population is just those people. Like, say there's 300 and I only want, I don't know, 50 or whatever. If I pick them randomly, it's still it's still convenience because the parameters I started with.
Yeah, because they will have the
Okay.
same characteristics, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Yes.
then your population will be just the agency clients if you choose randomly from them. So you didn't choose randomly from the population,
Okay.
you choose randomly from the agency clients.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So when we are choosing randomly, we are choosing from the population.
Okay, the whole, okay, gotcha. That's what
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if it had to be like the whole population or like
I
my
mean,
little
you can
population that I
specify
already
the
had.
population. It doesn't have to be too general. You can do that. I mean, you can define agency clients as a population, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can say that this research just will give me the information about this agency clients. That's my population, and I'm choosing randomly from that population to make sample even smaller. That's okay. But
Okay.
what the regular practice is usually when they use a strategy like this, when they use clients of one agency, they are not just defining it as like define the research population as agency clients. They define the population more general and they state that they use convenience sampling to reach to these participants.
Okay, that makes sense. So it depends on how I decide to define the population.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So next week, again, we will have a session at 7:30 p.m. That will be the last session we have at 7:30 p.m. because these 2 weeks are really critical. And I want everybody to have an access to this information. Yes.
Sorry, just a quick question. So I just want to make sure because it's Thanksgiving. And so
Mhm.
we are going to do it Thanksgiving evening.
Oh, next Thursday is Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know what do you guys suggest. I mean, I'm open to do it on some other day, like Friday. I don't have anything else to do. I just came here to school to just having you this conversation, this Zoom session, so I can do it on Friday. It doesn't bother me. So if you guys prefer to do it on some other day, I'm okay with that as well. What do you guys prefer?
I mean,
Like, just give me some ideas so I can have an idea about, because you obviously you guys are who benefited from this, right? From Thursday session. So next Thursday will work for you, or you prefer some other day?
so I can actually do Tuesday next week because I'm not working next week. So I guess it kind of depends on the two of you. I can do either day. Thursday would be better than Friday for me, but I can also do the Tuesday one instead.
Okay.
Do Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm open to anything really.
Okay. So maybe not do the Thursday one then, if it, and we'll plan on going another day. Is that what it sounds like?
So is Thursday working for you, Caroline?
It can, but if it works better for others to do it a different day, I'm open to any day.
Emily, is that working for you, or you would rather to change it? Because like if we change it, some other students may plan ahead because we announced it already.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
if is that works for you, or if it's not, we can move it to Tuesday.
Yeah, no, Thursday, even on Thanksgiving, we're just going to be sitting around very
I mean, it
full
will
and
it will
watching
not take
TV.
too
So
much time. It will be just half an hour.
yeah, that
A
sounds
brief
great.
Zoom
And this
session.
has been so helpful, like
I'm glad to
just
hear that.
to wrap my head around it.
I'm glad
So
to hear that.
okay, so next Thursday at 7:30.
Yeah. All
Okay.
right. Thank you very
That
much
sounds
for
great.
joining me tonight, and looking forward to read your drafts this week. Okay?
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.